What if we told you that China's rise to global superpower status comes at a steep price, paid for by the blood, sweat, and tears of millions of its own citizens?
Hey, are you okay? Barry, call the consulate now!
The Chinese government's notorious human rights abuses are a dark secret hidden beneath the glitzy facade of its booming economy, with forced labor, political suppression, and censorship all too commonplace. But in some recent months, there has been a great shift in world politics, with some nations calling out authoritarianism in China. Things have got heated up, and who knows what happens next. The draconian policies imposed by the Communist Party in China have wreaked havoc for the Muslims in the Uighur. With the Uighur population shrinking by at least 30%, it seems like the northern province of Xinjiang is pretty much isolated and left at the hands of President Xi's government. The Uyghurs are a predominantly Muslim ethnic minority group in the Xinjiang region of China. In recent years, there has been growing evidence of widespread and systematic human rights abuses against the Uyghur population by the Chinese government, including forced labor, mass detention, and cultural suppression. Perhaps the most well-known aspect of the Uyghur human rights crisis is the mass detention of Uyghur Muslims in what the Chinese government calls re-education camps. These facilities are estimated to hold up to 1 million Uyghur individuals, with reports of torture, forced labor, and political indoctrination. The detainees are often forced to renounce their faith and pledge allegiance to the Chinese Communist Party. Uyghur prisoners often are tortured while in prison to extract confessions. Such torture includes sleep and food deprivation, severe beatings, and administering injections causing the prisoners to become mentally unbalanced or to lose the ability to speak coherently. Victims also claim to have been kept in crowded jail cells and to have often lacked sufficient room to lie down at night. Some victims claim they were taken to special rooms to be tortured, where they describe being handcuffed with their hands behind their backs. In addition to the mass detention of Uyghurs, the Chinese government has also been accused of forced labor and exploitation of the Uyghur population. Many Uyghurs have been forcibly relocated to work in factories across China, often under conditions akin to slavery. Reports have also emerged of Uyghurs being forced to pick cotton in Xinjiang, which has led to calls for a boycott of Chinese cotton products. Many political prisoners are sentenced to death and executed. The northern province of Xinjiang continues to have the highest ratio of death sentences relative to its population size. As the world watches in horror at the atrocities committed against the Uyghur population in China, one question remains unanswered. What will be the ultimate fate of the millions of Uyghur Muslims detained in re-education camps? Will they ever be released, or will they languish in captivity indefinitely? And what about those who have been forcibly relocated and exploited for their labor? Will they ever see justice? As the Chinese government continues to deny the allegations of human rights abuses and deflect criticism from the international community, the future of the Uyghur people remains uncertain. The only certainty is that the world must not turn a blind eye to their plight, and must continue to demand accountability and justice for the millions who have suffered at the hands of an oppressive regime. It's not just the Uyghur population that seems to be suffering at the hands of the draconian Communist Party. Nationwide censorship, along with suppression of free voices, the situation looks grim, but there is something that might change the world order forever by bringing superpowers against each other. Now you guys might be asking a question. Why Xinjiang? It could have been another province, right? The northern province of Xinjiang is a strategically important region within China, reportedly rich in oil and gas, and used by the Chinese government for nuclear bomb testing. In order to maintain its hold over the region, the Chinese government has responded to the threat of destabilization by tolerating, to some degree, the Muslim religious practices. At the end of the 1980s, however, local unrest in the province led the government to initiate a crackdown on what they believed to be local nationalism and separatist sentiments, and the story has continued till the present day. Now it goes without saying that the Chinese government has been widely criticized on the world stage, but ever since the Chinese surveillance operation got uncovered in the US, the situation seems to be heating up. Everything started when the US banned some Sino companies on human rights grounds. Apparently, the Pentagon has imposed sanctions on multiple Chinese companies. An estimated 20% of garments imported into the United States each year includes some cotton from Xinjiang. When it comes to cotton production, Xinjiang is one of the leading cotton exporters in the world. The U.S. too imports a major share of its cotton from China, which is now banned. In a bold move, the U.S. is now the first nation to ban all sorts of imports from the region. But there were some top-notch U.S.-based firms that expressed some distress to this decision because they were heavily reliant on the raw material coming in from Xinjiang. Similarly, many giant tech companies from China have also been banned. Let's not forget Huawei, who got banned on human rights grounds. Talking about some recent actions by the Biden administration after the spy balloon controversy, sales of U.S. technology to several Chinese aviation and technology companies got clamped as a response to Chinese illegal surveillance programs across the country. According to the U.S. Commerce Department, 5 Chinese companies and 1 research institute were added to the so-called entity list, which will prevent companies from selling them American parts and technologies without a special license. The restrictions mark the Biden administration's first economic retaliation over the balloon, which the United States shot down recently off the coast of South Carolina after it had floated across much of the country. The administration has mostly registered its anger through diplomatic channels, including the cancellation of a trip by the Secretary of State to Beijing. Now the Chinese government has tried to downplay the incident, arguing that the balloon was a civilian device for monitoring weather. Of course, the Commerce Department did not specify if the banned companies had any direct involvement in the spy balloon controversy, but the United States has steadily ramped up its use of the entity list over the last few years, using it to cut off the flow of advanced technologies to rivals like China and Russia. The ban list is likely to expand in the coming days, but the million-dollar question is, will this strategy of banning Chinese companies have any yield in controlling human rights violations in Xinjiang? The blame game between the two superpowers has now taken a new turn. With the Chinese onslaught in Xinjiang, the Muslim territories are unheard of today due to the stifling freedom of expression. Moreover, global stakeholders have consistently tried to hold China accountable for its ventures, but despite criticism from the UN and the world alike, the extremism seems to be continuing. The U.S. has been increasingly vocal about its concerns over human rights abuses in China, particularly in relation to the treatment of ethnic and religious minorities in the Xinjiang region. The U.S. has imposed sanctions on Chinese officials and entities involved in these abuses, and has also taken steps to restrict trade and investment in China. China, in turn, has pushed back against these measures, accusing the U.S. of interference in its internal affairs and engaging of a campaign in political and economic containment. China has also responded with its own sanctions on U.S. officials and entities, and has taken steps to reduce its reliance on U.S. markets and technology. Looking ahead, it is unlikely that the U.S.-China rivalry will continue to be driven by a complex mix of economic, political, and strategic factors, of which human rights will be just one component. However, the issue of human rights is unlikely to go away, and is likely to remain a source of tension between the two countries for the foreseeable future. The extent to which the U.S. is willing to push the issue, and the extent to which China is willing to accommodate U.S. concerns, will be key factors in determining the future of the U.S.-China relationship. To date, the plight of the Uighur population in Western China has not been sufficiently publicized. Accordingly, it is important the international community draw attention to the suffering of the Uyghurs in order to pressure the Chinese government to end its abusive practices in the Xinjiang region. Will the violations against human rights ever cease in China? And will the voices of the innocent Uyghurs ever be heard? The situation might escalate further, but one thing is for sure: the world stage is the only place where innocent Uyghurs can make their voice heard. Let us know about your opinion in the comments section below.